Ana Knezevich vanished without a trace. Milo Tarin had already disappeared, and Detective Vera Lanski was left chasing shadows until a helmeted man on a grainy camera changed everything. Asterisk asterisk. This hook sets up the core mystery, teases the main twist, and immediately introduces all three key characters to draw viewers in with urgency and suspense. Ana Knezevich had built a quiet and controlled life for herself. After a difficult separation from her husband, Milo Tarin, she relocated to a peaceful gated community nestled just outside a busy metropolitan area. The streets were quiet, the neighbors kept to themselves, and the tall hedges surrounding each home gave her the privacy she needed. Ana worked from home, managing a small but successful tech business. She rarely entertained guests, didn't go out much, and had recently begun exploring mindfulness and solitude as a way to reset her life. Her days were predictable: morning, coffee on the terrace, hours in front of her computer, evening walks with her earbuds in, and short phone calls to her closest friend, Kasia Druin. Kasia had always been Ana's confidant. The two spoke every other day, sometimes just to check in or share a meme. But one morning, Kasia sent a good morning text and received no reply. Hours passed and still nothing. By late afternoon, Kasia had begun to worry. She sent another message, then called, but Ana's phone rang twice and went to voicemail. Around 7 p.m., Kasia received a strange reply from Ana's number. It said Ana had gone on a spontaneous trip with someone new she had just met and would be unreachable for a while. The message was cold, lacking Ana's usual warmth and quirky tone. Kasia read it again and again. Something about it didn't feel right. Ana was not the impulsive type. She didn't even like traveling, let alone with someone unfamiliar. Trying to rationalize her anxiety, Kasia told herself that Ana deserved to take a break. Maybe she had changed her ways. But deep down, her instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, Kasia tried calling again. This time, the phone was turned off. She tried Ana's work email, no response. On a whim, she contacted Renzo Valles, Ana's neighbor. They had spoken briefly at Ana's housewarming and exchanged social media, though Kasia barely knew him. Renzo, a quiet man with a background in private security technology, checked his own footage after Kasia mentioned her concerns. What he found unsettled him. At 2:17 a.m., the night before Ana's first strange message, Renzo's outdoor camera had caught a person entering Ana's property. The person was dressed entirely in black, including a black motorcycle helmet that concealed the face. The figure walked with precision, avoided lights, and never looked up. 23 minutes later, the same person exited Ana's home and disappeared into the darkness. The footage had a grainy texture, but the timestamp and movements were clear. Renzo informed Kasia, who immediately called the police. Detective Vera Lanski was assigned to the case. When she arrived at Ana's residence, the house appeared untouched. No broken locks, no signs of forced entry. Ana's car sat in the driveway. Her phone charger was still plugged in. A half-empty glass of orange juice was on the kitchen counter. Her laptop was open on the dining table, with unread notifications blinking. In the bedroom, the bed looked unslept in. A pair of sneakers was left neatly by the door. Nothing had been packed, no suitcase missing, no clothing disturbed. Even her passport remained in a drawer. It was as if Ana had stepped outside for a moment and never returned. The officer in charge noted that Ana's home security system had gone offline around 2 a.m., just minutes before the helmeted figure appeared. Investigators pulled neighborhood footage, but found no clear shots of where the figure came from or went. Whoever it was had taken the blind spots of the cameras into account. As the team continued their sweep, another message arrived on Kasia's phone. This one was more unusual. It said Ana had fallen in love unexpectedly and didn't want anyone to look for her. That was the final sign for Kasia. Ana never wrote like that. Her texting style was always casual and full of emojis and exclamation marks. These messages felt stiff, artificial, like someone trying too hard to sound vague and friendly. She passed the text to Detective Lanski, who quickly secured a warrant for Ana's phone data. What should have been a case of a simple disappearance was now unraveling into something much darker. The helmeted man, the offline security, the robotic texts, none of it added up. Something bad had happened to Ana Knezevich, and whatever it was had been planned with disturbing precision. Detective Vera Lanski spent her second day on the case, combing through every piece of digital information she could find. She started with Ana's phone records and quickly discovered a troubling detail. Despite the messages claiming that Ana had left for a trip, her phone had never left the vicinity of her neighborhood. Cell tower data showed it had remained in the same 3-mile radius from the moment Ana supposedly left until it was turned off permanently 2 days later. That alone raised a red flag. If Ana had truly gone anywhere, her phone activity would have reflected that movement. But at DIDN single quotes T. Meanwhile, forensic investigators were busy inspecting Ana's home more thoroughly. They noticed subtle signs that something had been wiped down. The doorknobs, the light switches, even parts of the floor near the front and back. Entrances had faint streaks, almost invisible to the naked eye, but clear under forensic lights. It wasn't enough to prove a crime had occurred, but it suggested someone had tried to clean up. The oddest detail was the security system. Ana was known to be meticulous. Her cameras and motion sensors were always active. But logs showed they had been disabled manually, not via the app, but from the control panel inside the house. Only someone familiar with the home's layout, or someone who had watched closely, would know how to disable it without drawing attention. Renzo Valles, the neighbor, was brought in for a formal statement. He provided the footage again and answered every question honestly. He explained that he had noticed the person on camera only after Kasia mentioned Ana was missing. He also handed over older footage that showed Ana's daily routine. It became clear that someone could have easily studied her schedule for weeks without her noticing. Ana kept a steady rhythm: morning walks, work indoors, and lights out by 10 p.m. To someone watching, she was predictable, vulnerable. Detective Lanski began considering the possibility that Ana's disappearance had been premeditated. Someone had entered her home, stayed inside for just under half an hour, and walked out unnoticed. No forced entry, no sound heard by any neighbors. Then, the text started messages that didn't match Ana's usual tone. Lanski had them analyzed by a digital linguist, who confirmed what Kasia already suspected. The messages had a different writing pattern. Even the punctuation and grammar were off. The investigation hit a new turning point when Kasia mentioned Milo Tarin, Ana's ex-husband. They had divorced 6 months ago after years of a strained relationship. Kasia didn't know many details, but she remembered Ana saying he had grown possessive and resentful toward the end. The marriage had ended quietly, with Milo disappearing from Ana's life entirely. But now, with Ana missing and strange details piling up, Milo was back on the radar. Lanski dug into Milo's history. He had no prior criminal record, but had changed jobs 3 times in the past year and moved across state lines shortly after the divorce. A subpoena on his financial activity revealed that 2 days before Ana disappeared, he made a cash purchase at a hardware store in a nearby town. The receipt showed he bought duct tape, latex gloves, a roll of heavy plastic, and a black motorcycle helmet. That discovery aligned perfectly with the footage from Renzo's camera, but Milo had vanished. His phone was inactive, and his apartment in another city was cleared out. Neighbors said he hadn't been seen in over a week. Surveillance from the area showed him loading a few bags into a rental van, which was later found abandoned on a back road 40 miles from Ana's home. Lanski now had a suspect, but no direct evidence tying him to Ana's disappearance. They had no body, no eyewitnesses, and no confession, but the picture was getting clearer. The man in the helmet was most likely Milo. He had entered Ana's home on the night she vanished and left behind a chilling silence. What remained was the question no one could answer. What did he do with her? And why had he waited until now to strike? Detective Vera Lanski knew she was running against time. The longer Ana remained missing, the colder the trail would grow. With Milo Tarin now the primary suspect, every move he made in the days before Ana's disappearance was under scrutiny. Surveillance cameras, credit card records, phone data, everything was combed through with intense focus. What she discovered next deepened the mystery and added even more urgency. 2 days before Ana vanished, Milo had checked into a rundown motel 20 minutes from her gated community. He paid in cash and used a fake name. The manager remembered him, vaguely tall, quiet, wearing a hoodie, and never making eye contact. Milo stayed there for only one night, checking out before sunrise. The motel's outdoor camera had a single shot of him loading a black duffel bag into the back of a rental van. The same van was later found abandoned with all identification stripped off. Investigators knew he was preparing for something, but what they didn't yet know was how carefully he had planned it all. Milo had studied Ana. He knew her patterns, her routines, and most dangerously, he knew her weaknesses. She trusted the privacy of her community. She kept few close contacts. She didn't expect to be watched. Milo exploited every one of these vulnerabilities. In his search history, recovered from an old tablet found in the motel trash, he had looked up information about home security, systems, how to clone SIM cards, and how to send scheduled text messages remotely. That explained why Ana's texts kept arriving, even after she had likely already been taken. Milo had set them to send automatically, creating a false timeline and throwing off the investigation. Detective Lanski began to suspect that Milo didn't just want Ana gone, he wanted her erased in a way that would leave no trace, no trail, and no closure. It wasn't about revenge, it was about total control. He had found a way to silence her while keeping others confused, hesitant, and uncertain. But there was still no evidence of where Ana had gone, and more importantly, what had happened inside the house that night. The forensic team decided to re-examine the house, focusing on chemical residue. After sweeping the bathroom, laundry area, and garage with luminol, they discovered faint traces of blood near a floor drain in the garage. It wasn't visible to the eye, and it had clearly been cleaned up, but it was there. DNA testing confirmed the blood belonged to Ana. Investigators now had proof that she had been injured or worse, and that someone had attempted to destroy the evidence. Further digging revealed another chilling layer. 3 weeks before Ana disappeared, Milo had visited a self-storage facility 2 cities over. He had rented a unit under another fake identity, again using cash. Surveillance from the facility showed him entering late at night on 3 different occasions. Detective Lanski got a warrant and visited the unit with her team. Inside was a carefully arranged collection of supplies: blackout curtains, 2 camping lanterns, cleaning agents, a cot, a metal toolbox, and a black motorcycle helmet. Also inside was Ana's smartwatch. The screen was cracked and it had been wiped of data, but it confirmed without a doubt that she had been inside that storage unit at some point. This was no longer a missing persons case. Ana had been abducted. Milo had built a temporary holding space, possibly even intending to keep her alive for a while. But there were no signs she had left the unit alive. Detective Lanski issued an official bulletin upgrading the case to suspected homicide. The net was closing, but Milo was gone. No passport activity, no flight records, no digital footprint. He had vanished as carefully as he had attacked. For Ana's loved ones, the waiting became unbearable. Every day without answers felt heavier than the last. Still, Lanski believed Milo had made one mistake. He was too careful, too precise. Somewhere in his obsession with control, he had overlooked something. And she was determined to find it. Weeks had passed since Ana Knezevich had vanished, and despite the mounting evidence, there was still no closure. The case had gained quiet attention in law enforcement circles, not because of media pressure. There hadn't been much, but because of the meticulous nature of the crime. Detective Vera Lanski, now deeply embedded in the investigation, returned again and again to the same facts. Ana hadn't left of her own will. Milo Tarin had planned something sinister. But the question still burned. Where was Ana now? Detective Lanski shifted focus from digital footprints to physical ones. She and her team expanded the search radius around the storage unit and reviewed traffic footage, toll logs, and local road maintenance records. One odd entry stood out. 2 days after Ana's last known location was the storage unit, a service request had been filed for a minor repair to the pavement near the gated community entrance right by the security gate. According to the records, it was a small team doing late-night concrete patching. No official city department had ordered it. This oddity stood out like a red flag. Surveillance footage from the community's gate showed a white van parked right next to the area in question around 3:30 a.m. It had hazard lights on, but no clear signage. The license plate was unreadable, blurred out, possibly removed, or intentionally obscured. The camera angle never captured the face of the driver. But the man who exited the van was wearing gloves, coveralls, and a dark cap. He worked alone. For nearly 2 hours, he poured concrete and appeared to patch something underneath the existing pavement. Then, before dawn, he drove off. Detective Lanski immediately ordered a ground scan of that section using ground-penetrating radar. What they found was horrifying. Beneath the concrete was a disturbed section of soil, shallow and compact. The team returned with a full excavation unit. Beneath that layer, less than 2 feet underground, wrapped in plastic and weighted with bricks, was the body of Ana Knezevich. It was a calculated burial rite at the only exit point of the neighborhood, a place no one would think to search. Milo had buried Ana beneath the gate itself, where vehicles passed every day, where the very act of movement disguised the presence of death. The irony of that location wasn't lost on Lanski. It was Milo's final insult, a message meant to stay hidden forever. Forensics confirmed Ana had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Traces of cleaning agents were found on her clothing, matching those found in the storage unit. It was also confirmed that her body had been placed there within 48 hours of her disappearance, timed to coincide with the fake messages that were being sent from her phone. The plan had always been to mislead investigators just long enough to complete the burial, but despite this breakthrough, Milo was still gone. The trail had long since cooled. Interpol was alerted, and an international manhunt began. There were rumors, sightings in border towns, cash withdrawals in obscure regions, but nothing conclusive. Milo Tarin had erased himself with the same precision he used to erase Ana. Kashadruan was informed privately before the discovery was made public. The moment she heard the truth, she wept not just for her friend's fate, but for how long Ana had gone unseen, hidden in plain sight while people passed over her resting place daily. The neighborhood fell silent in the days that followed. What was once considered a secure and private community now bore a permanent stain. Detective Lanski stood at the site one final time before closing the scene. She believed there had been one small crack in Milo's plan of vanity, perhaps, or overconfidence. Without that unusual concrete repair, Ana might never have been found, but she was. And that mattered. Even if justice was still out there, just one step behind. The discovery of Ana Knezevich's body beneath the community's gate shocked everyone connected to the case. The image of her shallow grave under the concrete, where neighbors drove every day, created a haunting picture that lingered in people's minds. It was no longer just a missing persons case. It was now the chilling story of a calculated and cold-blooded murder. Detective Vera Lanski pushed forward with even more urgency, determined to find the one missing piece, Milo Tarin himself, Interpol. had already issued a red notice, and Milo's name was now flagged across all international borders. But Milo had thought ahead. Weeks before Ana's disappearance, he had started taking steps to vanish. He'd slowly withdrawn cash in small amounts, abandoned his car in a remote area to confuse investigators, and used forged documents to rent vehicles and properties. He hadn't used his phone since the day after Ana's death. He had gone completely off the grid. For most fugitives, that would be difficult to maintain. But Milo was no ordinary criminal. He was meticulous, obsessive, and fully committed to disappearing. Lanski returned to his past, hoping the answer might lie in an old habit, a forgotten connection, or a weakness he couldn't bury. She began interviewing former co-workers, distant relatives, and acquaintances he hadn't spoken to in years. What emerged was a portrait of a man who had always lived on the edge of control. Quiet, intense, intelligent, but deeply possessive. He had been fired from multiple jobs for inappropriate conduct, though none had filed official reports. He left little behind emotionally or digitally. But one thing stood out: his fascination with false identities. Former co-workers recalled how Milo had once bragged about how easy it was to create a new identity in certain South American countries, especially if someone had cash and no moral limits. This clue took the investigation across borders. Agents began coordinating with authorities in several countries where Milo might hide, focusing on regions with loose documentation rules and quiet coastal towns. Meanwhile, Ana's funeral was held quietly, attended by a small group of friends and distant family. Kasia Druin delivered a eulogy that captured the essence of who Ana was: a woman who sought peace, growth, and a new beginning, only to have it stolen in the most calculated way. In the weeks that followed, 2 potential sightings of Milo were reported. One was in a bus terminal in Paraguay, the other at a remote fishing village in the Dominican Republic. Both came from tourists who had seen his photo online. But by the time authorities arrived, he was gone, if it had even been him. It became clear that Milo had no intention of turning up. He had likely created a new identity, possibly even altered his appearance. He was a ghost now, blending into crowds, avoiding patterns, staying invisible. Still, Detective Lanski refused to declare the case cold. She believed fugitives like Milo eventually made mistakes, not because they became careless, but because they underestimated the systems chasing them. The world was large, but not limitless. Milo had vanished, but not erased. Somewhere a face would match, a fingerprint would surface, or a quiet transaction would trigger a flag. It was only a matter of when. As for Ana's story, it didn't fade quietly. News outlets eventually picked it up, especially after the horrifying detail of where her body had been found. Her story became a cautionary tale about trust, about privacy, about the monsters hiding behind familiar faces. Her name was remembered, and her case became part of police training materials on digital deception and manipulation. Months later, a final twist emerged. A man using a fake name attempted to cross into Bolivia with forged documents. He didn't match Milo's appearance exactly, but a facial recognition scan flagged a potential match. Authorities moved in, but by the time they arrived, the man had already fled, abandoning his papers and disappearing into the jungle. Was it Milo? No one could confirm. But Detective Lanski believed it was, and she believed he was running scared. Now the net was still out there, tightening with every step.